go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the roll call. McGee here, Schultz here, Bottom, Barenkamp here, Nichols here. Everyone's present. Take the stand and join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Agenda approved. Is there anything from staff?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. We do have a few items that we had added to the dais. We did get a copy of the December 8th minutes on the dais. We have a revised attachment 9D, which is a update to the request for proposals, just some clerical items. Wanted to get that updated after some review by the Public Works Director. We have an added item 9E that we'd like to request to add some. We have had some financial assistance help finalizing the audit. They're running up close to their amount, so we just want to make sure that we don't go over that amount, so we can get that audit finalized. We're about 3 months away from it, so we've got really close. But so we have that item, and then
recording in progress.
We had a update to the organics recycling staff report. There was a item on there, and then we do have item 10C, which is the fee schedule amendment for item 10C. So with that,
anything from council? I was going to add a item 11B broadband update. Got some news on that front. That's exciting. So touch on that quickly at 11B. Anything else from council?
Yeah, I was going to ask to move 9A, 10E, 10F, and consent. Can I do that?
Let me just 9A, 9E, and F.
Yes. Demanding redaction.
Do weren't there options on A?
I think we didn't really make a recommendation on all the alternates of A, because there was some. I mean, we can provide recommendations, but I would. Unless you just want to, if you know that right now, but there's 5 alternates to choose from.
would that be?
Sure. Okay.
So is that not the there's not a 9F?
I'm sorry, 10.
Would it be 10 ENF, the fund transfers and the create funds?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda with all of those additions and changes. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Commission representatives, we have Lindsay and Judy here today for planning and parks and trails, respectively. Appreciate it. Then we have open forum for anything not on tonight's agenda.
Perfect. Anyone in the audience joining us in person or virtually can come to the podium if you're in person, state your name and address. Anyone joining us virtually, you can press *9. If you're on a telephone or if you're on an electronic device, you can click reactions and raise your hand. Mayor and Council, at this time, no one is raising your hand virtually.
Good, then we'll go on to presentations and recognitions. We have a years of service recognition for Paula Steelman for 15 years.
Perfect.
Okay, I do have some few comments and then some fun facts put together by staff, I think, which is now becoming a new tradition that we might have to do for every recognition we do, because I like it. Paula Steelman celebrated 15 years with the city of Corcoran on August 1st, 2023. Paula began as the sole full-time administrative assistant in the police department with police chief Sean Gormley and a small staff of 6 officers. Over the years, Paula's duties have increased to 12 officers and an administrative assistant. This means her duties have doubled over the last 15 years. If you need to know how to do anything in the police department, Paula is the person. She also coordinates and participates in many of our community engagement programs, firearms safety, truck safety, Night to Unite, and Country Days. She has also issued over 1,000 child IDs at the Hamel Rodeo and go the extra mile, or help any officer or person who walks into the lobby. Paula, thank you for your 15 years of service to the city of Corcoran. And we do have the
Yes, we do. You wanna come up?
some of the fun facts that staff, and I like some of these that put together. In 2008, August 1st, 2008, #1 song was I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry. Fidel Castro retired as the president of Cuba. I didn't know that one. Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president. Breaking Bad was premiered on AMC, which is the best show in television history, if you ask me. Iron Man was released as the first film in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Pretty good one as well. And Michael Phelps won 3 gold medals. I don't know how good.
Well, otherwise, thank you.
Not used to have to maneuver.
Paula,
Yeah.
thank you for your 15 years on behalf of all the officers, staff, your family, that you leave every day to come and work, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paula, for everything you do.
We'll give everyone a minute to file out. They're not here to see exciting.
Thank you for sharing her with us
Truly,
very much.
we appreciate it.
If you guys don't run out of cake, I'll be here all night.
That was actually one of the quickest exits of recognition. Impressive. Well organized. On to consent agenda, which now consists of 7A through D, and E and F, but also happens to be same letter.
Welcome, Chuck.
Yeah. So I will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7A through F. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Alrighty. On to planning business. We have a public comment opportunity for item 8A, which is Rogers 2. I don't know if we have the official name. Maybe we'll get some context on that too. But yeah.
Perfect. Anyone in the audience wishing to speak as public comment can come state your name and address at the podium. Anyone joining us virtually can press *9 or click reactions and raise your hand if you're joining us virtually. Mayor and council, no one is currently raising their hand. We have 7 people online, including.
Yeah, I had a couple slides
Yeah.
we could walk through. This item, the full packet was in the packet. The property is on Highway 55. It's our southwesternmost property in the city. It's on the border of Greenfield. And you can see the property on the site, or excuse me, on the screen. It's south of one of our solar farms. If you go to the next slide, Jess. The applicant requested a rezoning from urban reserve to light industrial, approval of a site plan for a mini storage complex, a conditional use permit, which is required for the mini storage, 3 variances, 1 to allow development in the MUSA in advance of municipal sewer and water, a second to reduce the required buffer around the perimeter of the property. That's our newly adopted buffer ordinance. And allow a 20-foot setback where 50 feet is required adjacent to residential. And the Planning Commission held a public hearing at their August meeting and recommended denial of the request. Next slide. Following that meeting, we've been speaking with the applicant, and earlier this week the applicant reached out and said he would like to revise the plan to eliminate 2 of the variances related to the buffer and the setback. They would modify, that would modify the project to still require the rezoning, the site plan and the CUP, but only 1 of the variances. On your dais tonight is a packet received this afternoon from the applicant with the new site plan. And the applicant is simply tonight asking the council to table the request to allow them to put a new plan set together and bring that back to the council for hopefully approval. They're asking for feedback. If the 2 variances are removed, is there support for the 3rd variance to allow development for the mini storage in advance of sewer and water? Timing wise, we'd need a new set of plans so that staff has time to review it and bring an updated packet. But looking for feedback. The next slide, just for comparison for the audience, is the change from, there we go, from the plan that the Planning Commission reviewed on the left versus a concept on the right that appears to comply with ordinance requirements and eliminates those 2 variances. Staff has not reviewed that, but the intent is to comply. So the next slide is really just the applicant's request to table this item. I would note that we've taken the 60-day review period. If the council does table it, we would send a letter extending the review period an additional 60 days as allowed by Minnesota statute. And the applicant is here this evening.
And if Craig or anyone in the applicant team want to speak? Don't have to.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
And this maybe you could address, but before, what is the consequence or negative impact to the applicant if they themselves pause the application process rather than us tabling this conversation at council? What if the applicant just paused their application rather than me tabling this conversation?
Is the question if they had asked us last week before the packet went out to delay it?
No.
Or, oh.
Because we have a timetable that anything that comes before us automatically gets approved if we don't address it within a certain time period. It's 60 days, and then we can ask for an extension of another 60 days. But if we don't address it, it automatically passes. So that prevents government from tabling something forever and not allowing someone to do something but not actually addressing the problem. So, if an application or an applicant comes in and says, I want council to table the discussion tonight, then we're essentially penalized in our review process because the faster they get to that next 60-day period, the less we can try to make the project better or fit in or whatever. Because ultimately, if we fiddle, then it gets passed. But what I've always asked is if the applicant wants a pause in the review process, I would prefer that they themselves pause and then they themselves reinitiate so the review process doesn't get into some time constraint and automatically pass. So why wouldn't the applicant pull their own application rather than asking us to table the motion?
If they withdraw their application, to stop it, they would need to reapply and resubmit the fees, so it costs them additional money. What they're asking is for us to table it, allow them to work on it. We would then have until about November 8th with the additional 60 days, which is, 4 or 5 council meetings. And that's why, is they don't want to withdraw and resubmit and go through the process. They're hoping council will say I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they're hoping council will say, without those variances, we think the planning commission feedback was positive. Planning commission did say they supported the variance for development in advance of sewer and water. We won't make you go back to planning commission if you revise your plan and eliminate those two variances. So it saves them time and it saves them money. That's exactly why they're asking you to table it instead of withdrawing the application and resubmitting.
Okay, how much is the resubmit fee?
A lot. I can check here.
I know it's a lot, because there's another person on the agenda that we want to help on that one. Okay, I think I don't have any other questions. If it was a big time deal,
Then we would have to,
yeah,
or
or maybe revise the code to allow, but I don't want to take away from flexibility on the council's part if we are working with someone that we're up against some time clock and then we get a less refined product.
Don't they normally include elevation plans in something like this, or is that at, am I missing something here?
We do have elevations, did they not? So we can see some of the building elevations in the staff report, and I thought they were attached in the back of the packet. We do have elevations.
You know, where it shows the exterior of the buildings?
Yes, because one of the questions that we have is about the siding. Lap siding is proposed.
you guys happen to know, feel free to step in.
I don't see that they're going to talk about, we're in the planning commission packet, we do have elevations here.
Yeah, I apologize for that. We do have elevations. They're shown on page 5 of the staff report, but for some reason not in the packet. My apologies. I can,
Something we can get for when this comes back.
absolutely, yes. And certainly, you know,
I
Jessica
can
can
pull 'em up
provide
right
the
now if you'd
copy
like.
to council tomorrow. I apologize for the oversight.
Definitely tabled until that point, because you talked about issuing a conditional use permit. You know, you'd like to see what the elevations look like and what it looks like before you even talk about a conditional use permit.
Yes.
Did you have any comments you wanted to add?
Are able to pull in what the app there, and, definitely put some time and effort into the building architectural plans, if you remember what, garages 2, structures look like. Now, these are large unit storage, not main storage, these are large unit storage, buildings. And architecture is going to be very similar to what the garage 2, project is. Yeah, we do appreciate, your consideration here, allowing us to revamp this a little bit. We definitely are not interested in trying to come in and do something that's not in compliance here. You know, last thing we want to do is come in and try and get a bunch of variances. Appreciate working with staff and being able to come up with ways to work within the code, do some adjustments, and achieve the setback items that are necessary here. So, I think the site lays out fairly well as far as its access over on the westerly side in line with Town Line Road. Note that there is a future street plan. We're accommodating for a future street to be built there, so when that properties to the north develop, the access will be reconfigured as a public street there, but it doesn't affect our buildings because of how we have configured the access side. So we think we have a good plan here for the
think if we're gonna give them, we have the approved, or the newly submitted plan, so unless if we're suggesting that they need to make additional changes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, council members, you certainly can provide feedback. In fact, the applicant would appreciate it. Once you have a motion and a second to table, you can't discuss it, but before you have the motion, you could discuss it. And again, apologize for not including all of the architectural plans in there. I did have a question in there about, is lap siding an acceptable material? We don't know if it's hardy board or vinyl. Our code does not typically allow that in commercial industrial sites. We did allow it on garages too, but felt like that was something the council might want to give feedback on. But if the 2 setback variances are eliminated and the applicant is able to comply with the setbacks, the only variance would be the variance to allow development without, in advance of municipal sewer and water. And then the only other question that the Planning Commission didn't really discuss in a lot of detail was the architecture. And then the second question that the Planning Commission concurred with staff, which was, the buffer ordinance does not specifically state that the landscaping required for the buffer ordinance is in addition to the base landscaping. We are very clear about that when you're reducing the setback along arterial roads, that landscaping is in addition to the base requirement. I believe the intent was that the buffer landscaping was intended to be in addition to the base landscaping, but because there's a variance in this application, we could provide clarity to the applicant in this case, make that a condition to the variance, and then if in fact it's intended to be in addition to the base landscaping, we would clean that up as part of a fall ordinance cleanup that Natalie is planning to bring forward to you later this year. So those couple things would be helpful, specifically to get feedback as the applicant goes back to revise his plans, if you do table it.
Thank you.
Sure. So, this is the second similar project. There was also Corcoran too. And what I really appreciated about the previous project was they did a lot of work with the neighborhood to make sure that it would be a good transition from the residential homes that border on the north. They provided good screening. They worked with neighbors to ensure they had good buffering. There was even some land swapping going on as part of that project, which all worked out really good. My concern on this one is, given its location, it's right on 55. It's a fairly narrow parcel that's adjacent to a much larger parcel that's also guided for industrial. And my concern is that we've got a lot of storage facilities in the city already. There's not a lot of really good highway accessible industrial sites. And so I have some concern about allowing this one to develop early, because it's kind of it has the potential to provide some good frontage for a future business that wanted to do a much larger development that could potentially provide a greater diversity of industrial opportunity in Corcoran. So where it made a lot of sense to me previously on the other project on the other side of 19 is it provided a really good buffer to a residential neighborhood that needed a buffer from the industrial zoning adjacent to that neighborhood. In this case, I don't see that as an inducement, and I want to think very carefully whether it makes sense to allow a variance for early development and allow something that is only going in because it doesn't require sewer and water, as opposed to waiting for that utility to be available and potentially creating a better opportunity long term. But in terms of if we're dealing with a project and we agree as a council that as a plurality we want to proceed, as long as they are meeting the intent of the buffering ordinances, I have no particular concern about the project. It's just, is this the right time to develop it in this location?
I guess I had similar thoughts on the process. One of the big concerns with me was the frontage and not seeing elevations. You're just gonna have like a big solid wall that looks like a storage facility on a commercial industrial location. I
We required a higher level than the first phases because those first phases were done before we had architectural standards. And so for the buildings in this final phase, the goal was to bring them into compliance with the current ordinance standards. So what we ended up doing is providing a variance so that the internal elevations do not comply with our design standards. So we sort of met in the middle between the minimum standards in the current code and what was allowed before. So when you say higher, I think you mean higher than the first phase, but
Yeah.
it's certainly not higher than what our code requires. It is the minimum that our code requires.
So that's more like a typical wall construction. Why doesn't a typical wall construction apply to something like this?
So the issue that I raised in the staff report is that the design guidelines do allow a variety of materials. Tilt-up is one of them. Integral color concrete blocks, which they've got proposed, is one of them. What it does permit is fiber cement siding, but not vinyl flap siding. So the materials, this would comply with all of the design standards if that lap siding is fiber cement, and the applicant hasn't told us that. But presuming that it is fiber cement, it does comply with our design requirements for an industrial building. Park Place Storage just chose tilt-up instead of something else.
I can just quick, the siding would be fiber cement siding. It would not.
I think just in general on it, to answer the question you guys had, I think that the changes to this plan are in the right direction, and I'm much more supportive of what this is looking to do than what it was initially planned. So I appreciate you guys coming up with some alterations so quickly. I think the elevation, that would be helpful to see at the time that we are discussing we're bringing this back to council.
Yeah.
So that everything also rises, but in general, with just that one other variance on there. I think you guys raised some good points on the timing aspect, but I'm not as concerned about that one variance as I was the other two.
Can I ask you a question? If municipal services came to that area, is there any intent of hooking anything up to them as they go through?
If it did, another application would require it.
Yeah.
Currently, the way that the ordinance is written is that when, for commercial properties, when they have access, they would be required to connect.
I don't see.
What would they connect?
Yeah.
What, to
Sprinklers
what?
probably.
Sprinklers, if there were sprinklers required, but as of right now, we would, if they have any facilities, we'd require them to connect.
If there was municipal services in the area today, would this building require sprinklers?
The building code determines whether sprinklers are required or not, and this doesn't, this does comply with the building code. I think if sewer and water were available, they might have a different plan to manage the fire code. I believe they're using firewalls to minimize that, so sprinklers are not required in this case. So I think even if sewer and water was available, they might be able to avoid sewer and water. The good news is they're literally in the southwest part of the city at the end of the pipe.
That's not what we get. You're not sure when that will be.
We do not.
I'm just asking. I'm not necessarily.
In my mind, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the look of this building and such, I agree, it'd be nice to see the elevations and such, but the properties to the east, they're going to change over time also, if I remember right. The one is a multi-use automobile type place, and then the next one is Lano. North is all commercial, industrial, so to speak. The question I had is, why are we talking residential
The buffer ordinance, I remember when we adopted that, we had a lot of conversations about is the buffer ordinance based on land use or zoning, and the council decided it should be based on zoning. The urban reserve zoning district is a residential zoning district that's a holding zone until sewer and water is available. So while the property that wraps this property on the north and the east is guided industrial, it's zoned urban reserve, which is
Gotcha.
residential.
Okay. No, thank you. Can you put that map up?
The land use map?
As far
Or the
as
zoning map?
the
The
drawing
site plan?
Sure, give me just one moment.
of this, I'm trying to put something.
This-
I might have looked too fast. I want the whole area, the picture with the solar and those kind of things.
Oh,
with
the
north.
aerial?
That area, please. Thank you. And houses right now, being urban reserve, are there houses back there now? To the north between these properties and the solar?
No, that's all one property, the solar farm, and do you see the house directly east of this lot? There's a farmstead there.
Yeah, no, I
That's-
know that. I'm just looking to the north. It's just open.
Yeah, that's all the same lot. The solar array and that house are on the same lot, so there's only the one house on there.
And then the whole thing around Corcoran, Corcoran Garage is over off of Highway 55 and stuff. That's kind of the same application here of putting this stuff in before sewer and water is accessible, correct?
The Garage is 2 application from the same applicant? Yes.
Over off of 55 where Pella was gonna go and all that stuff. Am I
Oh,
talking
the
something
Pioneer,
different?
the Pioneer Trail Industrial Park,
That
yes.
one, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same variance, it's a very different kind of an application to Councilmember Nichols's point. That's an industrial park, but
Yeah,
same
okay.
variance.
Then where I'm going with, I believe we changed or we accepted a certain style material that was built out of and such. That wasn't per our ordinance and stuff. We approved that.
Correct, for the mini storage, because that of course has mini storage too.
Great.
For that one, we approved a metal tilt-up. I don't know how to describe it, I forget the brand name, but it's almost a tilt-up panel with metal sheathing. And you did approve that as a material for that mini storage.
Is that an option here or it's just a different zoning? Just something
Yeah,
more to
it
look
is
at.
something
Would
they-
it be more appealing than
Yeah.
what that design is?
Well, I mean, it could be, I mean, this building with the hardy plank does comply with the code. They're not
Okay.
asking them for a variance from
Okay.
that.
I just see a whole bunch of things are gonna change out there, and this is gonna set the tone. And if it's a relatively decent looking rendition when we see it next, it is a barrier, it is it's blocking the view to anything that happens to the north and stuff. It's a start of, but again, that whole parcel north of there is all planned to be industrial too, so. And to sit and wait for sewer and water to get there, nothing could happen out there for 40, 50 years. And that's not one of those things I want to do to somebody that wants to be.
Also, for what
Do
it's worth,
something.
thinking of lot ownership, whenever that parcel does develop, there likely would be some frontage. Because of the parcel wrap around to the east and north, same parcel.
Yeah, it's just to the west there, that's already a body shop, a auto repair, and an auto
Right, right, right.
detailing place. And then I think
This,
right next to them is a landscape business, if I remember right.
So let's say in 30 years,
Yeah.
that site develops into a big industrial park or something, there would still be 55 frontage.
Yep.
If that's something we're concerned about, because the property was down.
Does wrap.
Yeah. And no one's here to oppose, no neighbors are talking, no information. Did anybody come, if I may ask, to
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Could I get some clarity on the buffer landscaping?
Yeah, I was, thanks for bringing that back up. I was a little confused as to what clarity you still need, because doesn't this revised plan not need?
I think she means generally in terms of, do we intend for the ordinance to require more screening than would be otherwise required, or just allocate existing screening requirements to that area? And my recollection is that we wanted additional screening, but maybe I remember it differently.
Oh, I remember it as well.
I don't recall anything of it.
I think that was the intent.
In addition?
Yep.
Yeah, I believe that's good clarification, and we'll bring that back to you with an ordinance update. But we can require that with this because they do have a variance, so we can deal with it for this one at least. Thank you very much, Council.
If there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to table this item to, can we table it to a future, we need to
Could,
pick a date on it?
no, I think we can table it to a future meeting. I think from a staff perspective, it depends on when the timing it will get in for, when we get in the revised plans and can get it reviewed.
I'll make a motion to table it to future meeting. Is that a best step?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks, guys. On to unfinished business. There's another public comment opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Anyone in the audience who'd like to join us to speak on unfinished business, you can approach the podium, state your name and address. Anyone joining us virtually, you can press *9. If you're joining us on a phone or an electronic device, you can click reactions and raise your hand. Mayor and Council, at this time, no one's raising their hand.
We'll go right into 9A, which is City Center Drive and 79th Place. Utility improvements.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and we do have a slideshow really.
Well, yeah, I know there was, really the purpose of keeping this off consent was there's 5 alternates, and we just wanted some direction on the alternates. So Steve Hegland's here with Stantec Engineering to kind of walk through those alternates. We'll make it as brief as possible and basically just answer any clarifying questions, excuse me.
Thank you. So, thanks Kevin. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Keep it brief. So, last Wednesday we opened bids for this project. We had 7 bids. I really just want to run through the base bid of the project alternates. Under all these scenarios, SR entered these some with the lowest base bid, so we're just referring to their costs. Under any scenario, they would be the lowest base bid plus all alternates. Well, the base bid on this project was $5,063,531.65, which was below our engineering estimate of about $5.6 million. Next slide. So we just want to run through the alternates. As you remember, there was a base bid and we had 5 different alternates. So we just want council feedback on these alternates and if you want to move forward with the project. I think it's easier just to go through them one by one rather than try to confuse it all again. If that's okay. So alternate number 1 was the water main extension. So this was the price to extend the water main in front of City Hall and then extend the water service to City Hall. This does include the water main and the service. I believe this would be paid for primarily through ARPA funding. So that was a cost of $154,000 and nearly $155,000.
Okay. Now, you know what we have in ARPA?
Yep, I was just going to pull that up right now.
Thank you.
Actually.
And then I guess my next question would maybe for you, Jessica.
Yes.
Do you know, I saw in the staff report mentioned that 1 and 5 are ARPA eligible.
Yes.
Would they be in their entirety?
They would be in their entirety. We spoke with the city attorney in relation to alternate 5. And he did confirm, he did believe that we could use the pavement.
Oh, yep. So I talked to both the auditors and the attorney, and they both confirmed that we can use ARPA funding because we claimed general revenue replacement for the ARPA funding. So we can use the ARPA funding for that.
For both of the, for the water and
And the paving of the parking lot. So we had received $683,000 from ARPA. we had a few projects that are being covered by the ARPA, for example, record scanning, police radio, broadband, Granicus, and the council sound system. So we have 468,000 left over.
Great, thank you very much.
Do you want me to just, do you want to stop on each one or do you want me to go through them and then?
I think you can go through the rest now, I just wanted to get those questions.
Sounds good. Alternate number 2 is the individual tree grade, so this is a replacement of mulch, so basically just put mulch as the trees. This includes natural decorative tree grade and concrete grading. These kind of create a decorative sense of feel and reduce on public maintenance input, but we just found the costs with this. I'd also point out as we transition to urban downtown, these will have a much greater effect if you're talking about a more dense urban that comes southeast.
Would this also include irrigation for the trees within the system?
Yeah,
And our cost is capped at that, right, as the rest of the city develops that downtown, those costs will be picked up by the developers in the area.
That's, yes, we're de facto the developer because it was our property in this project. So this sets this kind of this, at least for the spine road. If you look at the downtown grid, this would be the road that connects all the way down to 10. I think it's a reasonable extension to mimic this. Those other lateral roads and what that looks like is probably up for discussion. At least the spine road, I think we would be allowed to, kind of plant the flag with this. So that's the vision. This would be consistent with the vision of the downtown.
Alternate number 3 is alternate tree species. So remember the base bid had elm and linden, and there was some concern on potential beetles. So we gave out an alternate hickory and tulpa trees, and there was no cost change, so we just let that do in the spot.
Wait, are we changing to catalpa trees?
2 catalpa trees.
Can I?
Or
What?
and hickory.
Yes, yes. Catalpa, I like catalpa trees, but they're super messy. And I don't know, I'm not one to nitpick choices like this, but a lot of people love catalpas, they look pretty, but then they always say, I hate my catalpas if they drop those huge beans and remain. But if you're okay with that,
Yeah,
I would
so-
not be okay with it, even though I have a bunch of them on my property.
We have no long-term maintenance.
I know, but that's whatever.
Understood. I think we tried to balance it. I tried to stay with some of the trees that are identified in that design standards. Remember, there's the Southeast Design Standards. There were some additional trees that were pretend to be a landscape architect that they thought were even messier than those, so that was kind of the variety of that. Maybe the least messy of some of the alternate number 4 was the plan for arms with irrigation. So this was brought up to the planning commission, actually to the fire department chair commission and to the council. That was a recommendation to add the planter arms, individual companion planter boxes from these trees, and they come with internal irrigation systems that we can modifications to the irrigation system that automatically irrigate the rest of this road.
But that's not the cost of the full pole, right?
No, that's the cost of adding it with the internal irrigation.
Okay.
So there's 54, I believe there's 54 lights, so this would be modification to all 54 trees, plus the irrigation system, all 54 lights.
Did we already approve the alternate light pole?
That's what was bid out.
That's what we're doing.
That's what was,
So if you wanted to go back to the.
Oh, so this is the alternate light pole?
This is an alternate light pole with the arm. So if you remember when we originally presented it, I made the recommendation based on maintenance efforts to remove the planters. And that was approved, and then the Parks Commission requested that it be reconsidered. And then so the choice was, let's get an alternate on reconsidering it with the condition that we could irrigate it, which was one of the primary concerns for the maintenance. So then this is the alternate to consider the planters with irrigation. So it's that same light with just a planter arm and irrigation run up into it.
And it still has the full pole
And the
all those components plus
it's the planter arm with the irrigation is the only enhancement to the pole. Otherwise, it's the same
What is
pole.
the actual cost of the pole? Is that based
In the
That's in the
base
base bid.
Oh, okay.
Do you wanna know the actual price?
No.
It's in the base bid, correct, in the accounting for the base bid number,
Okay.
5 million.
That's fine. Thank you. Is there any way to charge that alternate bid to Parks and Trails?
We-
They met the Parks and Trails, the park plan?
I do not think we'd be able to do that. That's along, that, from the park dedication, it's not along a, I'd have to look into that, but I don't know that it would align with our, it's not on the trail itself and related to the maintenance of the trail system.
Probably even charging.
I'm not trying to be hard.
Yeah, I think we just need to I'd wanna look at the allowable uses within statute, but my recollection is that I
Probably
think
not.
it's unlikely that we could do
Alright,
so.
that's fine.
But it gives us the flexibility to make every other person that develops that property use
Do
a
it.
better pole.
Yes.
You know, make things look better. So we just do a little bit here, and now we set a higher standard for stuff we don't have to pay for anymore.
Good point. Yeah, to me, this is a marginal cost. The pole is the big cost, and that's considered the base bid, which is lower than what we expected.
Yeah, so I don't know, it's like $1,200, roughly $1,100 or $1,200 more per pole.
Over 54 of those.
Yeah.
And then alternate number 5 is the addition to the police parking lot. So this includes the additional paving, curb and gutter, there's additional lighting and landscaping to help screen it, and there's outlets allow for additional funds for their trailers and vehicles, so we're adding outlets into every other parking stall, so we have more flexibility to use the parking lot. And that's at a cost of $63,564.06.
And that's ARPA eligible.
It is ARPA eligible.
So with that, we'd ask the council to consider the base bid plus any selected alternates for this project and award to SM Pensions and Subs in that amount, and then review and consider approving our construction engineering services to stamp that. With anything, it's up to $380,000. We bill on a time and material basis only for the cost incurred.
Sounds good, thank you.
I would note, council, we are planning to bring an upcoming funding breakdown for this, for all of our projects related to the 23A bond at the September 28th meeting. We want to look at MSA funding and where the bids come in and allocate any, have some discussions on allocation with ARPA and bonds and interest on bonds and a variety of things. So we'll have a formal breakdown of some suggested ways to do the funding.
Yeah, just one or two options of the recommendation. So we have cost to cover this, it's just what percentage you want to use. And so we have some flexibility with some of these bids coming in lower. We have some flexibility in choices, so I just want to refine that so we can account for that when we charge it.
We need to include any language to that effect.
No, at this point, we would award the bid and then we would identify sources and uses at the next meeting. As of right now, we do have in our bonding that we would bond for a portion of this with the bonds, or the projects coming in lower than our bonded amount. We just thought that we clean everything up and be able to show you a final financial plan that's gives us a chance to look at MSA funds for future projects and things like that. So,
Yeah, so just want to clarify, this would be a conditional approval pending land acquisition. And that's in the report.
Can we kind of look for discussion during the items? Is there anything else? No?
I'll make a motion to approve the base bid plus final alternate.
Second.
Company SM. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
You, I suppose.
On the
right now,
engineering
or-
services?
Yeah.
Yes, please. That would be, I guess, yeah, if you can add that on.
Or a separate.
Or a separate motion,
Just
yeah.
one.
I'll entertain a motion to authorize Stantec to provide construction engineering services estimated at $380,000 for the time and materials.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for going through that, that's helpful.
Okay, 9B, we have,
We're supposed to talk into our microphones, and I always look at the mayor, so.
got
Yeah,
one
I-
extra, so we can.
I apologize, I think at Charter Commission, we had 10 folks in this
Yeah, they
week,
kinda
so
mixed
we shifted
Oh,
the
okay.
microphones around a bit, so, sorry about that.
Sometimes people write us letters and say they can't hear us, so we try our best to like be conscious of where the microphones are.
And you're actually Alan, name tag in front of you, and Alan is a nobody.
Oh,
I moved mine.
Thanks for letting me know that.
Just checking.
I could say a bunch of stupid stuff and they'd just blame Al. Maybe I've already done that.
Okay, on to item 9B. We do have a resolution recognizing the 2023 Night Unite event and the donations, which are plentiful.
Alright.
Take a look in the packet. Reading out every single one of them. I will read the most as a resolution. So, whereas the City Council of the City of Corcoran, Minnesota does hereby find as follows. Whereas Night Unite is a statewide event that is done to celebrate and strengthen neighborhood and community relationships in participating communities. And whereas the City of Corcoran supports the efforts of the 8th Annual Night Unite events on August 1st, 2023. And whereas the Corcoran Night Unite events consisted of 11 neighborhood parties and one city-hosted party located at the Public Works facility. And whereas the success of this program is a direct result of the support from the City Council, community volunteers, the City of Corcoran employees, Northwest Area JCs, Corcoran Lions, local emergency response, and local businesses and sponsors. And whereas the Exhibit A, which is the next page of this resolution, outlines the financial and in-kind contributions to the City of Corcoran utilized in support of the Night Unite event. Now therefore be it resolved, the City Council and the City of Corcoran acknowledges the outstanding efforts by the Night Unite planning team, event staff, and volunteers, and the generosity of all donors, and graciously accepts the financial donations as listed. Thank you to everyone who made it a great event. It was another. Couldn't do it without everyone in the community. Nice, special.
For sure. Thank you all, and I know that we had a lot of work by the team putting it all together. I know Jesse B. and Officer Eckenberg and Sergeant Eckenberg and Officer Anderson, as well as the Public Works team. A lot of folks working on the event, and a lot of time and planning and the event, including some overtime for the event. And so it's a big event, but a lot of positive feedback. So
I'd reiterate all the time and effort that our local volunteers and nonprofits put into that is actually how it gets done. In addition to city staff and stuff, but I think we're a city that's guided and led by non-government officials, and I really, really love that. So thank you all the people that belong to those organizations and put their heart and soul into our town.
If possible, I would like to note there were 3 very monumental donations that really helped make it successful. The Corcoran Lions actually covered the cost of the meat, so the pork chops, the hot dogs, and they cooked on site. This was due to Joe passing away, so we normally would utilize his services, but with him having passed, we found a different option, and they were more than willing to help us, and I could not be more grateful. The Northwest Area JCs donated $2,000, just monetary, so that always helps as well, because we can put that towards anything. And then Chanticleer also donated part of the cheese pizzas that were involved in the event, which helped us offer a separate option for either vegetarians or those who might not eat pork. So very grateful for the support. It was a great event. We're happy to have the community tables there too. It's nice to see everyone kind of pull together, and then people get to see what's available in the community. So thank you guys for being so supportive.
Well done.
Alrighty. On to 9C, which is the city administrator search process.
Did we make a
Oh, we
motion?
did not make a
Oh,
motion.
did I just skip right over that?
Yeah, motion to approve.
Resolution 2023.
Second.
Michelle gets picked. Alright, all those in, or any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks for catching that, guys. 9C, which is the city administrator recruitment update.
Perfect, thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to add a update to the council's schedule. When we selected our interview dates for November 6th, our recruitment representative recommended that we look at doing, just from a timeline for applicants, recommended giving them an October 12th date for selecting finalists. We currently do have a work session scheduled on October 12th. I've been working with our Detective Spelcy to change our license plate reader work session and just swap that for the September 28th meeting. But wanted to just confirm that timeline with council, that we're comfortable with October 12th for selecting finalists. And then there were some clerical changes, clerical changes to the job description. After last meeting, it was noted that the planner and recreation supervisors, those reports had been removed from the job description, and then we recommended a 6-year requirement for experience for the city administrator. So with those quick updates, just an update to the job description, approving a resolution, and then calling for the October 12th work session to be scheduled for the different topic of selecting city administrator finalists.
Does that date work for everyone? We already
Can I ask a clarifying question on the requirements? 6 years of experience in broad areas of managing public organizations. It's on page 3. Does the recruiter know about that requirement?
Yes, he had it as 6 years, and we had talked about potentially making it 8. And
Yes,
so
but
he,
about the managing public organizations.
yes, I believe so.
We
He had a, he had a copy of, when he looked at, I had sent with a copy of the job description changes we had proposed. So yes,
But he may need to be reminded
I will,
of that
okay.
requirement.
I will share that with him.
Other than that, I think we're all good on the 12th.
Yes.
Any other stuff? So I will entertain a motion to approve resolution 1D2367, approving the city administrator job description and call for a special city council work session on October 12th, 2023 at 5:30 for the selection of city administrator candidates.
So moved.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question again? Sure. Sorry. November 6th, is that the day for the special meeting officially?
That is the day that we did.
We did select that.
We
We
did
talked
select
about
that
Yes.
last meeting, yes.
Yes. No, I don't, but I want to make sure that I will be in town hunting here, but I want to make sure that you're.
We're good here.
Okay.
And timing wise, we've not, I think the date that we select finalists on the 12th, we'll finalize the time, depending on how many finalists we can set the time accordingly on that day.
Okay. On to 9D, request for proposals and qualifications regarding the park.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor and Council. In your packets, you'll find, and there was actually an updated version that got sent out earlier this week. There were some clerical updates and just some adjustments as we got a little more information, including a doodle poll that was sent out to determine the date for finalist interviews if necessary. So as part of the process, the vision is to release the RFPQ, the request for proposals and qualifications for, and this is where it gets very lengthy in title, Master Park Planning and Design Services. So it would ideally be released tomorrow, assuming that you guys approve it tonight. And then the deadline for questions and inquiries would be September 15th, and the closing date for for submissions would be September 29th. The earliest selection we envision happening at the October 26th City Council meeting. Realistically, the idea of the proposal is to create a toolkit that we can use to help develop the park system. There will be highlighted projects such as the City Park Remaster and then the Boardwalk and Trail Loop in the open space park and the Bellwether development. Those are the two that will be highlighted and kind of at the forefront. But the idea is we want to set ourselves up for success moving forward so that we don't necessarily need the consultant forever, I would assume, but if we can get the toolkit going and get the help and the advice and the guidance, then that'll set us on the right track.
Any questions on that?
Can we make comments on it?
Sure.
So the underlying projects are going to be expensive. So I would strenuously suggest that if you are not prepared in the near term, not meaning next year, but within 3 or 5 years to spend the kind of money that we don't get, hire a consultant to design all this stuff.
Okay.
Or if you're, if you're not sure, then, that's okay too, but if you're adamantly against spending money, please vote against getting this, issue sent out.
And I will note we have gotten some donations and we're still exploring grant options as we continue forward with it, just to try and offset some of those costs because park projects do get expensive, I won't deny that, but as we continue to get park dedication in, that should help too. And then hopefully the federal funding, fingers crossed.
Somewhere between, I think,
500,000 and 325,000.
And just maybe a point of clarification, if I may, this really is to like interview and select someone for a master service agreement. It doesn't authorize any design on the projects that would likely follow. So to your Councilmember Bodma's point is like that you do this because you want to do something, but this just really sets the interview process to help us select somebody. I just wanted to clarify that. We would determine budget and program and timing, all those would be further actions.
Yeah, I'm just saying, don't go through the bother of, like when we've had in the past, we've paid consultants to design roads, and then the council will vote like 4-1 against building the road. And my contention would be, don't hire a consultant if you think you're gonna vote no on building the road, you know what I mean?
Correct, yeah.
And we don't need to waste your time either as staff trying to figure this out.
I had 2 questions. First question is, on page 167 of the packet, resumes, proposed lead technical professionals, calls for them to be licensed engineers. And I was wondering if that's a common requirement for this kind of a role, or is this, I guess I had in my mind that Stantec would be the engineering consultant arm, and then we would have a park designer who might not be an engineer. Is that the wrong model to use for something like this?
What page of the RFPQ?
I
So
think
it's-
I think that was a edit, maybe in the newer one is corrected, that should say landscape architect and or engineer.
Okay.
With the primary likely emphasis being architect,
That
landscape
makes more
architect.
I think I thought I updated that part. And if there are clerical errors that you guys would like updated, I can certainly do that before it goes out as well.
And then I had one more thing. If you you go to the map that shows the remaster, I don't know if you have it on the slide or not.
If you give me a moment, I can pull it up.
Okay. I'll give you a second.
Is that a required degree in landscape architect or engineer of some kind?
That's what we're asking for.
I believe in the updated one, it should say that we're requiring either an engineering degree or landscape architecture, or there might have been one other one.
But to Councilmember Nichols' point, the landscape architect component is what we don't have, so that would, so we can re-double check that, but that should be in there, so we'll follow up on that before it's released.
How do you define landscape architect? You have to have a landscape architect degree?
It's
or
a
can you
actu-
have
It's an actual certification, so professional engineer, it's a Minnesota State Board.
Yeah.
It's like ALELSIG. There's, a professional land surveyors, the certification.
Yeah.
So an RLA, a registered land surveyor, or a registered landscape architect is a state certification.
Yep.
Yep.
So, I think I know
Is
that.
this,
But are we limiting ourselves by making someone have, like, let's say there's somebody who's been designing a park is kind of art and science. Are we limiting ourselves to only people with certain certifications to design the park? There's probably lots of landscape architects without the certification that actually design parks, or do we want to open it up to people with skill sets, but not the skill sets and experience, but have it be a judgment call on the engineering? I like the professional and the nerdy stuff too, but I don't know how much of that has to be required to design a park. There's a ton of right-brain, non-engineer skill sets that I would like, and probably other people would appreciate for a park design. I wouldn't want to narrow the scope so much.
I hear what you're saying. I think some of the, and correct me if I'm wrong or you have different interpretations of this, like some of the firms that we think might be interested in submitting for this would all have landscape architecture.
I think it's I think there's some protections that come with having a professional license in the process, so I think I would recommend keeping that in there. Now, I would also argue that a landscape architect is quite different than an engineer, and they are a lot more creative, and they bring different perspectives, and they're schooled differently, so I do think we're looking for that. That's part of the recommendation. We have an engineering consultant that we have a lot of confidence. We have a planning consultant that has a lot of history and a lot of confidence. We don't necessarily have a landscape architect that we can use as a resource to help us guide these, and there is certainly an art to that, and that's just that balance of that approach. So I think that is a little bit more what we're looking for. We want to make it broad on any professional service, so if there's a really good engineer that is morphed into being a specialist in park development, then we would want to entertain that and interview them, and that would be part of the selection process. So what we're really doing here is getting them to submit their proposals, getting their background, getting their pricing, and then the finalists will bring in an interview and ask whatever questions we want to all of them and select who we think is the best fit. So to your point, I think we want to be as broad as we can, but I do think we want that that benefit of having a professional service kind of guide the process. Does that make sense?
I'd like to do this once and it lasts a long time.
Yeah, I think the goal would be to develop a relationship. Now they have to perform. We have to hold them accountable. That's on the onus is on staff. The better feedback we give them, the more success we're going to have. But yeah, the intent of this and what we put in there is, yeah, we would like to develop that relationship because park planning is ongoing. We have a lot to plan with parks. There's a lot of decisions, and I think we're doing good by investing early before we start parks, because you might be 4 parks in and you want to redo stuff. There's an expense to that. So I think that's that expertise that we're looking to supplement current staff with. So, and then we would have some discretion on how fast we want to go, right? Like we'd have to set a budget with them, right? we would have to talk about what our priorities are. That's, once we identify a team and bring them on board, then we can kind of talk about the priorities more, talk about how aggressive we want to be, listen to their feedback and have more of an exchange. So we're just trying to identify that team member now, and then we'll focus on the more, we'll know more in where we're at with everything and how aggressive we want to be. But we need, I think we're making this recommendation because we want that additional experience to supplement us.
Mr. Mayor, I got a question. I don't, if I'm derailing the subject and such, I'm sorry, I don't intend on doing that. National Night Out, I spent time at Bellwether and such in the clubhouse talking to a lot of people, and a number of folks were asking, when is their boardwalk going to go in? Why is this part of that design when don't we already kind of know where the boardwalk is going to go, and can this go in, and aren't funds already there for this, or is this, I'm asking out loud for a whole bunch of people that talk to me.
Yes and no.
It's a very valid question. They're actually running kind of parallel. My answer is parallel.
Okay.
We're trying to do that. If we get this person on, they'll hit the ground running and help us supplement it. So we're not really waiting for one or another. We're trying to hit the ground running in parallel with a lot of this stuff. So we're processing that boardwalk.
To do that is something that we probably want to do in the winter time.
Yep, it's easier to do in the winter time for that type of project.
And I'm all about sooner than later, because it's time it goes in and such. That's me, my thought. I told the folks possibly this winter, but I didn't promise anybody, so.
I think that still remains the goal.
Okay.
Yep, so that's accurate.
All
Why we've kind of, it's really helpful to kind of give them guidance on where we think we're at, right? We're gonna tell them what types of things we need help with, so they can kind of,
Understood.
they can kind of, put some thought into it, right? So some of the interview questions and stuff would be, what are you gonna bring to supplement our current ideas, right? And that's kind of the interview process to them. So we're really just identifying areas, types of projects, things, so they can help prepare their package to us on what they can offer to help us. So that's really the intent of this, right? Is here's what we need, here's what our current work we're working on, city remaster, boardwalk or priorities, and then we also have open space to plan, other neighborhood parks to plan, and then we don't necessarily identify that, but we try to highlight the two big ones that we talked about more.
Like I said, didn't want to derail it, just wanted to ask if you've already got plans in place, and this would just be a benefit if we could get it done. Great.
It would help in all aspects of park
Gotcha.
development.
Thank you.
I know people are thinking that they're excited about
Extremely patient, extremely good folks to deal with. It's just, again, we're going to build a boardwalk once. I don't want to see it even doing all these changes, and it'd be nice to be a nice design. So, good job.
Do we anticipate this person coming in and radically changing his park master plans? Are these plans set, it's just how you execute on this?
More of the latter. If they had some recommendation that we wanted to reconsider, we would do that. But I think our position is these are pretty established plans. It would be helping the implementation, it would be helping the sequencing, it would be helping the vendors. What do we quote out? There's like, if we did this project, we would identify how we do that, right? So we have an engineering team. If they have capacity, they could do the infrastructure, right? That's no problem to mass grading. We get into splash pads, and that's, how do you want to approach that? Do you want to leave a placeholder and then bid that out separately? Because that's not a traditional kind of standard, streets, roads, utilities aspect. So you can package these all together to gain efficiencies. You can package them differently to implement them faster. But you need some of the expertise on, so it's like connections, relationship, timing. It's really just advice. It's, hey, here's some experience, avoid this, or there's, help us set up those a la carte packages for playground, right? We just say, here's going to be a future playground, but simultaneously they could be working with JCB on playground vendors, and you can kind of run things parallel instead of having to wait for them. So
I would think
they're very involved.
They're limited is, let's say we get $1 million on our federal request, and then we look at whatever park dedication is at that point, and then we would look, do we need to make some tweaks? Will we consider phase one, phase no, or will we be able to give us guidance on what we move this quarter, do this later, break it up?
And there's parts in here too to try and mitigate how much rework we have to do. For example, and I did find a typo in my finding this, the design should be inclusive of the variety of new amenities as shown in the city park 30% design plan. So we're trying to have them reference that so that we're not redoing it over and over again. We've gone out, we got some community input, and so we know that these are the items that the residents want. So we'd like to continue moving forward with that.
And they could maybe help in further fundraising they might have
Yes.
experienced. And it's meant to parallel where we're at and help us take
I
off.
would imagine working with the Three Rivers on regional trail and all that.
The regional trail was also included in the appendix to try and give an idea of, hey, this is proposed. And then additionally, I had one more point, but I just lost my train of thought, so never mind. Additionally, nothing.
I have 3 additional points to make up for JCB. So in the narrative, we talk about volleyball, basketball, and tennis courts, but they're not highlighted in the graphic.
Right, yeah, that was a late addition after one of the Parks and Trails meetings. They wanted to include that potentially. It wasn't fully set in stone. So it just didn't get highlighted. I
They
think
are included in the
phase
budget.
1. Yep.
Whatever happened to
So-
the archery field?
It was determined that having it at
So those are
first
safe.
in the little island of grass wasn't necessarily deemed safe. And then it got moved up to near the sports dome, and then I think it got taken out because we needed parking for the said sports dome. So that was not part of phase 1 per se, but
Can I ask a question?
Oh, you have 3 points,
Didn't you? Tennis courts, you do not have to wait to get on the tennis courts, but pickleball courts, you have to wait to get on pickleball courts. And I'm no park design guru by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't have that special designation either, but I think we have to look at that. Pickleball versus,
There are 6
And
pickleball courts in the plan.
yep.
are they early?
Yeah, phase
Oh,
1
they are.
includes the 6 pickleball courts, and then it would also include the basketball and tennis court. I think
Oh, when
we're
you-
envisioning 1 tennis court and 6 pickleball
When you
courts.
just said it, you didn't include pickleball part.
That was me. I
Oh,
said it.
sorry.
And I just said the ones that I didn't see highlighted.
I see, okay.
But yeah, they're up
That
here.
was pickleball.
I should know one other area that would be helpful for this person to bring is like policy development. Like, so once you implement this, how do you set policies to manage the recreation program?
That's been
Pickleball
issue that's come up
specifically.
recently.
Yeah, so it's like that's another element of expertise that we're hoping an interested party could bring to enhance our team.
There's a lot of conversation about pickleball courts and the noise that it produces and those kind of things. Is that all part of this too? The complaints about noise on pickleball and
I think
all those.
that's more of an issue in neighborhood
Are you
settings.
being serious?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
They
it
make
is
a
a
lot
very
of
big deal.
I had a council meeting the other week.
So,
I was up on the edge of the wilderness in Marcel, Minnesota, and the tennis courts were changed over. They had temporary pickleball courts. I went, I watched, and the neighbors that lived half mile away came over and complained about the noise.
Mhm.
And then the people loving it out in the middle of the wilderness. It was crazy. And then I went in and dug into it. It sounded like it's a significant issue everywhere.
Funny.
yes. Very
One item
significant,
that-
widely talked about in Parks and Recreation.
Well, archery is not quiet.
Yeah.
I found a spot.
Nice.
It'd be neat to combine the two, so anytime the balls hit, you could take a shot. Just saying.
Shooting over the pickleball court.
No, hitting the pickleball.
I'll look into it and see what I can find.
It's a concern only because of everything that's happening, but it could be that just they put them in the wrong places in the middle. I think my other trip over to Bass Lake Crossings, same issue, when are we gonna get pickleball courts? We gotta go all the way down to Gleason Fields to play pickleball right now. And
It's a polarizing thought, right?
It is
Either love it or
crazy.
hate it, but we'll have to.
it was fun
navigate
watching
that.
the folks play it.
Could do it
was
indoors.
good, but
put it in the dome.
I'm
All
hearing
these
that
are
we're
great
moving the dome to
discussions.
phase 1.
Anyhow,
There would be a home directly behind
it's a big
Yeah,
deal,
yeah,
guys,
no.
and you guys are thinking it out
Yeah.
very, very well.
And more to come. That's,
Oh, I
as
bet.
soon as, if we find somebody, it's gear up and have those conversations.
Hang on tight.
Or until told otherwise.
Is there any other questions? I will entertain a motion to authorize the release of the RFPQ for park master planning and design services as amended.
As amended. Great.
So moved.
Second. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And 9, which is added to the agenda, financial assistance request.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So at the May 25th, 2023 council meeting, staff had requested that council approve $17,000 for finance assistant to try and help finish up audit for 2022. Abdo Financial Solutions currently have spent now a little over 60.5 hours as of the end of today, and they have reached their limit of 17,000. They have the last quarter left in 2022 that there still is a discrepancy that's resulting from January of 2022. So they're just trying to narrow it down with that last quarter of 2022. And so staff is requesting $5,000 more, and hopefully they won't spend it all, but to finish up the 2022 audit.
I have a question. Because we're the stewards of public money, will we ultimately find, or is it available, what the discrepancy is in what the resolution is?
So there's something going on with the cash and potentially the accounts payable general ledgers. Staff wasn't able to figure it out so I re-looked at every single bank statement, and I wasn't able to figure it out on my end. They have more background with BSNA than I do with that accounting software, so they would know where to look better than I would.
Yeah, and we'll ultimately get a report that.
Yes,
this
it
is
will
our
be
fund.
part
It'll
of
be in
the,
our annual
it'll be a
report,
part of the audit.
just in case anybody's watching and wondering.
We just want to make sure that we figure out what's going on.
How much
Yep.
are you looking for?
5.
Which is the
Could-
financial
could-
discrepancy.
That's what I was
It,
asking.
it was larger at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, so when we transitioned over BSNA, we were looking at over $1 million discrepancy. Now that they've narrowed it down a little more, we're looking at around $12,000 or give or take.
And I would note again, our bank, what we had come in versus what we had came out matched is just within the software is tracking differently. So we have accounted for our money in and out, just so everyone's clear, but just want to make sure that our books match the way we think that they should.
You just can't do a dummy entry and clear it, you got it?
No, we cannot.
Alan Schultz.
So we're just trying to be very thorough with it, and so we appreciate just wanting to make sure.
Alan. Good job.
Yeah.
There's no other questions on there?
I got a question. I thought we approved this as part of the consent agenda.
We had well, there was some discussion about 10E and F, and
Oh, I had,
That's what we did.
I wrote 9E and 10F down. My fault. I'll take that back.
Then I will entertain.
I'll make a motion.
Perfect.
Second.
All those any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
May I tee up 10A?
Please.
Sure. So the applicant, always say to people is, when they have questions about stuff, come, or they think about proposing something, come to council and ask all of us. Put it on a napkin, don't put a bunch of money and time and effort into something until you get a decent read on the council. So he'll tell you more than me about it, but he basically wants to have his garage match the other structures on his property, but to do that, he has to put in an application for, and he said, do you think the council is gonna be okay with it? And I said, I can only speak about what I would be okay with. Why don't you come in and run the idea by, get a read, and then before you spend the money on the application process and the ballot processes he has to go through. So, I asked him to come in.
Great idea. Let's go ahead and do the public comment opportunity for 10A through, we didn't already take off, A through D and G, and then we'll go right into 10A.
Anyone in the audience who would like to speak on any of those items, please feel free to come to the podium. Anyone joining us virtually, you can press *9 if you're on a telephone, and we can recognize you. If you are on an electronic device, click reactions and raise your hand. Mayor and council, no one is raising their hand at this time. Thank you, Mayor and council. I had asked Kendra to help us put together an outline of some of the questions that Mr. Brown had asked of city staff when he came in a couple weeks ago to meet with staff, and so the planner Davis reiterated that there'd be 3 applications required if we did want to move forward with that: a lot consolidation, a conditional use permit, and a variance based on the current requirements. And so really today we can speak to a bit of the background. We were able to pull the file and get some additional information from the 2004 approvals that were granted. I'm not sure, Kendra, if you have anything to add.
It's good to tee it up. I think there's a couple questions that we might have, then I think from there if there's further questions. But my understanding is that there was a lot consolidation approved in 2004, like you mentioned. It just essentially wasn't filed with the county. Okay.
Correct.
And then if that lot consolidation were in place, or I'm assuming that would need to be reauthorized, probably has some certain timeline on it.
Well, Mr. Mayor, Council, the resolution for the lot consolidation was filed at the county, so typically with a consolidation, even though that's an administrative approval, we do have a fee that is required, and then staff will administratively complete the forms and give it to the applicant to record. Because it was approved, and I think Mr. Brown just didn't get it filed at the county in 2004, it still is approved, and we would suggest that the council could authorize staff to waive those fees this time and just help him complete those forms so he can record the lot consolidation.
I would be supportive of that. Pretty straightforward. That aspect of it. And that solves the second aspect, I believe, in terms of building size or accessory building size, because they'd be over the threshold as opposed for being able to do a CUP for additional.
Right, once that's consolidated, he can apply for a conditional use permit for the additional square footage.
And then the only other item would be overhang. I don't know if council has any specific concerns on what the applicant's looking at doing, or what the best approach, if that's going the variance route or going the code update route to allow the 1-foot overhang, or the 2-foot.
Yes.
Yeah, if you'd like to speak, please come on up.
Thanks for taking the time to look at this.
Or if you can just state your name and address. Although
Jay Brown, 22355 Oakdale Drive. I'm here with my wife, Stacy. We're new residents in moving to a different building or another building that potentially has a larger garage door, because we might want to get an RV put in there at some point as well. So, we settled on a barn-like garage. I don't know if you have the information that I.
Yep, it's in the packet.
Oh, so you've got that, okay, I thought maybe it would go up on the screen. But on the first page
could.
there,
Give me
you can
just a
see kind of what we're envisioning, this proposed garage design. It's like a $20,000 building kit from Menards. It requires about $10,000 in concrete, flat slab, and foundation work, so it's just storage, it's not a really big deal. And we'll, as we go through this, think about these questions that I had that I wanted to ask you. And by the way, what I heard already was very helpful. I think I understand a little bit, oh, there we go. I think I understand a little bit better about what's happening here. So if we go to the next page, this is our survey that was done in 2004 that we were just talking about. And I just wanted to let you know that the far western property there, the 13 or 14 acres there that the cursor is on, we bought it as a hayfield. The wetlands have been filled in and all that, so we worked with the USDA and the Sherburne County Conservation District to redo the wetlands and reseed the prairie in there. So we're trying to keep it kind of a rural type area. In 2004, the reason we did the survey is because we added a building to our existing barn. It was just basically another structure. We didn't want to put like a pole barn or something out there because we had a regularly nice barn with 8x8 oak risers and all that. And so we basically put that thing up there. So the one on the right there in that picture on the top is the original barn that was in very nice shape when we got the place. And then the part on the left is kind of 90 degrees, so that was the barn that we put in addition. And then if you look at the bottom picture where that red car is parked, there's kind of, you can see some black outlines there. That's, right now it's an asphalt pad, but that's where we're going to put our additional garage. Let's see. So going a little further forward here.
They're done.
There you go. So so this was my take on the roof overhang variance. So the existing structures all have a 1-foot overhang. They all look like a barn should look. The structure in the bottom is just a picture from the Menards website, and you can see on the right is a normal overhang, and the left is a 2-foot overhang. And I think that it just doesn't look very good, and it certainly doesn't match the existing buildings. I think probably when that rule was created, it was really, I mean, a structure like this wasn't really envisioned because this just looks quite a bit different. In fact, I had a meeting with Kendra and Kevin and Natalie and one of the engineers. I can't remember. Natalie was very helpful. She sent me a couple of really long emails talking about all this. One of the things that she wrote in there is that it is important to understand why the city has this standard. We're talking about this 2-foot variance for a sidewall over 12 feet. It says, my understanding is that this standard is created as a way to ensure residential accessory structures have a more residential look than an agricultural or industrial building that don't always include eaves and overhangs as features. Well, you know, we're one resident on 21 acres. You might call us residential, but we're not. There's a big sign in the front. It's a farm. And so I'm not sure that ordinance really should apply to what we're trying to accomplish here. We just want another building that looks like the buildings that we've already got. So then, if we can go to the last page, which basically is all the costs that I heard about from the meeting that I had with the city. And it sounds like some of those might have disappeared, but the key thing there is this line right here. Note that paying these fees and expenses doesn't guarantee approval. So that's the primary reason why here, or at least one reason why I'm here. I don't want to start spending a bunch of money and find out that for whatever reason this isn't going to be accepted. So I know you can't offer me a guarantee, but I'd like to get your feeling on whether this would be something that would likely be approved.
Appreciate it. I think my initial question would be regarding and this was kind of what I pieced together from when you had the original buildings on there with the 1 foot, I'm assuming back in 2004 or prior, code allowed that. Subsequent to that, we changed the code to not allow less than 2 feet overhang.
No, as we learned today, when we were able to track down the packet, the code required the same thing. The difference was back then, you could, on a parcel more than 10 acres in size, instead of getting a variance for the overhang, you could ask for a conditional use permit for the shorter overhang, just like you could ask for a conditional use permit for a taller sidewall and more garage space. So I think that may have changed in how the processing worked, but that condition was there in 2004 and was part of the application in 2004. And so staff's concern, and I don't want to put words in Natalie's mouth, but she's been the one having the conversations, not me. But I know her concern is it'd be very difficult to show how this meets the variance standards. And so one of the questions that she brought up at the staff meeting is perhaps the question for the council is it time to revisit the accessory structure standards and eliminate or modify the even overhang section? I know that is her position, that it will be difficult for staff to recommend approval of a variance in showing that the variance standards have been met, because again, you have to show practical difficulty and economic considerations isn't it. So ultimately that's the council's decision, but I think she was pretty clear at the meeting that she would not likely be able to recommend approval of a variance and felt that an ordinance amendment might be a better approach. But I think that's part of the reason we're here tonight, is to get some feedback from the council on that.
Any initial thoughts on any holdups on allowing?
When was that 2-foot overhang changed?
It's been a while.
It was so, Mr. Mayor, Council, in 2003 and 2004, the Planning Commission and Council had a joint committee to rewrite the ordinance. And I remember this conversation very vividly because I was involved in that. This section was already adopted, and the committee had no interest in changing it. And it's come up a couple times, and no one's been interested in changing it to date. But so I know it was in place before 2004. I believe it was like a 1999-2000 addition to the code.
So I had my house remodeled, and we had an architect come and look at our house, and they said, "Oh my God, it's overhang. It totally takes it out." So we cut those big overhangs that are apparently required by Corcoran statute down, because it's an old style that people like and appreciate it. And I don't necessarily, if there's no reason for it, I wouldn't necessarily say we better keep those 2-foot overhangs.
Right.
If there's no practical purpose.
I mean, would you rather have one building looking
Could have you
different
come up-
than the rest of them?
Get it over to the mic.
As she comes up, I agree with John. I'm always curious about all of our ordinances related to everything that's already existing out on the western side of the suburbs, or western side of Corcoran and such. 1-foot overhang dates my house back to 1926, and my barn in 1908. It's what they look like out there, and it'd be nice if we could keep some of that stuff. And I know
Yeah,
what
and
they have out here.
that's what I would say is, I mean, we have a very nice property with all of the Blue Barn Farms. It was it was featured on the Independent Master Gardeners Learning Tour this year that brought a ton of people into Corcoran to see Corcoran. Everything sort of matches. It's all blue, the outbuildings all sort of match, and now we're gonna have to put something that's different out there because it's, which we're happy to work with people, but it doesn't make a lot of sense at this point, other than that's what.
Is there,
It looks silly.
oh, sorry.
So I have one comment about this as well. I was given a couple of different options here, a variance, which was I was not going to get because of what the Canvas said, that what was the wording, not meet the practical difficulty standard. And maybe the city council would approve that anyway, the planning commission wouldn't. The other alternative was a zoning ordinance amendment. But the problem that I have with the zoning ordinance amendment is that it's going to apply to the whole city, and I'm being asked to pay for it. And I think if it should apply to the whole city, the city ought to pay for it, not me. So that was a $2,700 chunk that I didn't list on my list here, but, you know, I'd be all for that, if that makes sense to do it. I think it probably does, especially the structure that we have on our property.
We might have a precedent on that, though, because like we've had people in the past that ask for ordinance updates, right?
We have had folks come in and ask for ordinance updates. One I can think of is the event center ordinance. There were folks that wanted to be able to do that.
Center, the solar ordinance,
solar
those were paid
ordinance.
for by residents.
The fence one, was that one too?
The fence one, the city initiated. So I think that we've had some, you know, it has not,
Is there a way that you can write the, change the variance to write, we've got all these comments right now, but to match existing architecture, because we've got some homes and barns out there that are plenty old. I mean,
yeah,
it's-
we'd be changing the variance standard.
Would
with
we?
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken, and I think that's Natalie's position, is that this section of the ordinance could be better written to reflect circumstances like this.
Right.
The idea, I know, of this section of the code was, and you guys are familiar with this, you know, people used to build ag buildings that had 0 overhangs. And a lot of the people on the Council and Planning Commission at the time did not think those looked great. And so they added requirements for minimum eaves and overhangs. And and the feeling was the bigger the building, the taller the building, the bigger the eaves should be in order to be to scale. But I think there are other ways to get to the same thing, but it either requires that we amend the ordinance or find, in this case, a practical difficulty. We think that section probably needs to be rewritten regardless, but in this case, it would be difficult.
$2,700 to add a sentence or a paragraph or?
Well, again,
I-
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry,
It's the public hearing costs and
Oh,
the
I got it. I'm
city
sorry.
attorney review and.
Right.
Do they sell ones with 2-foot overhang?
No.
Well, then that's right.
Yeah.
No, you can't buy something.
But you could build something.
I could do a plan, have somebody draw up a plan and do it that way, you know, but that would be much more expensive and still wouldn't match the rest of the bill.
Are even all agricultural buildings required to have 2-foot overhangs in the city?
Depending on the sidewall height. So it's the sidewall height that's creating that requirement. If it was a shorter building, it would have a 12-foot overhang. So if he had a shorter building, he wouldn't have the issue. 12-foot, or 12-inch, I'm sorry, 12-inch. So it does vary from 12 to 24 depending on the sidewall height. So not all ag buildings are that tall, and they don't all have that larger overhang.
Many existing parks don't even look at high sidewalk.
Definitely existing, yeah. There's a lot that are just.
There could be some that were put in before the code was
Right.
amended, so.
Is there a way to modify the code in a relatively cost-effective way that would allow you to build a structure to match a grandfathered agricultural building that meets certain historic definitions? So you're not allowed to just build a bigger pole shed without incurring significant costs.
Certainly, Mayor, Council, I think you certainly could add some sentence like that. I think if Natalie were here, what she would say, though, is it would warrant a look at this section entirely on eaves and overhangs, and whether we really need to go from 12-inch overhangs to 18-inch overhangs when you go from a 10-foot sidewall to a 10 to 12-foot sidewall and to a 24-inch overhang when you go over a 12-foot. So I think she would say she'd like to look at it a little broader, but to your question, you could add a sentence that says eaves and overhangs shall be permitted to match existing accessory structure, even overhang measurements pretty easily. You just think if you're gonna have her spend the time to do that, you might wanna think about the broader context. But at your direction, it could be as simple as that.
I'm cautious about allowing, I take the point that you made from earlier issues, and I think we're likely to see a lot more cases of people putting up things like that than we will cases of people trying to duplicate attractive historic structures. So I think we need to be cognizant and realistic about that risk. I might be open to broader wording, but I'd be careful about removing anything entirely.
I think that would rather your comfort and flexibility to match residents more so than over entirely changing.
Then as far as the issue of too many cars in your buildings, I've got room, just give me keys and bring them. I'll help you out.
Not the wrong.
I'll help you out. We'll say
If we were to
very
look,
sorry.
I know you can't give us like an exact cost, but if we were to look at some sort of simple update like that, what are we looking at?
Well, again, it's Natalie, and I'm not exactly sure how her time gets exactly billed, but if the council really just wants to add that sentence, I would suspect that's probably 8 hours to, public hearing notices, writing the staff report, and having the city attorney take a look at it. So, I don't know what that means in terms of her bill rate.
If it's 8 hours, it would be around $500, $520.
With her time plus legal.
Plus
legal,
legal,
plus
so I
legal.
would say
Oh, yeah.
$1,000.
Okay,
Give or take.
that is my calculation, so I don't have those numbers.
So maybe half of the 2,700 and maybe it's less.
Right.
As opposed to doing a more broad, change to the standards that would increase that cost. So I'd be in favor of doing something more limited. What you mentioned, Jeremy.
So limited in scope to preserve historical character of the city.
I would rather be us than an applicant.
Exactly. On that. So I would say, you want to make a motion, you want to make a motion on direction to staff. Well, trying to think that process wise.
Yeah, I think that you could by consensus direct us to begin work on it. I would note that there's there's gonna be time to draft it as well as, time. We wouldn't be, depending on when you were looking to be able to put up the barn, there's just some time that would be to draft it, public hearing notices and all of
Yeah,
that.
generally, we wouldn't accept an application without the variance or ordinance amendment. So I think we just want to chat with John to make sure they can run concurrently. Otherwise, it will delay his application by a month. If he was submitting the application with his site plan, they could run concurrently. So I think we want to run that by the city attorney and make sure we can accept an application for an ordinance that hasn't been passed. Normally, we wouldn't do that, so that might affect the schedule if it's city initiated rather than a request by the applicant. I know if it's the applicant, we can run them concurrently because that's part of his application. So we'll just need to follow up with the Browns after we talk to the city attorney, if that's the direction, rather than having him apply for it with his conditional use permit.
Gotcha. So I think everyone's in agreement about direction to staff.
We can
We
start
don't
that
vote,
moving.
we vote on that, or does it
No, not
staff direction?
This is
We don't
feedback.
If you're
we're doing it by
comfortable.
consent.
Let's not feedback to the.
True.
We could either
Come
make
and
an
motion
initiative,
and vote on it, or do it by consent.
you make a motion to staff to initiate the process by which we add, the qualifications Jeremy mentioned to buildings that, align with the yada, 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 yada.
Architectural.
Architectural structures and construction property, so that, so they meet, consistent.
Yeah. Let's get it to wordsmith it.
I would suggest we probably don't want to talk about historical significance.
So, so I'm just saying, we are making a motion to direct staff to add that piece to existing.
city code.
Yeah.
At city expense, and we'll work on that we'll add that to our list of things to work on and find out about timeline if we can run them concurrently. Otherwise, it'd just be following the city process. Now, there are public hearing timelines, so likely it would not be able to go for a public hearing until October 5th.
Does that run into the timeline for their, the 60 days and 60 days that we talked about?
They haven't applied for anything, so I was just
Oh,
gonna
that's right.
say, the next
Come in and
step,
talk first.
yes, so the next step would be for them to submit their lot consolidation forms and plans to Natalie. She'll be able to sign off and give them to go file at Hennepin County, and that consolidates the lots. Once that's done, again, I gotta check with the city attorney, but presumably then they could submit a conditional use permit application for the oversized garage space. And depending on the timing, that might be on the November meeting after adoption of the ordinance. It might be able to run concurrently. I just don't know tonight, but we'll follow up with the Browns.
That red barn will look real nice next to my red barn.
Yeah.
Inside my red barn.
Inside.
Just real quick, we did have a motion to the.
By Bob.
Right?
And any
Yep.
motion. It has not been said.
It has not.
Second.
Thank you.
Like
Any
we
further
just-
discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so one more question that was on my list is, talking about the expenses and the fees, and not sure I understand it, I no longer now have to do a new survey.
You still need your survey and your legal, it's probably easier if we talk offline, but
Okay.
I don't think you need a new one, because I think Otto did it for you in 2004, and you
Right.
just need to get it.
I had a meeting with Otto a week ago.
Yeah.
And that's basically what he said.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so that's good. And then something else that came up that, in terms of the cost here that I don't understand, we talked about briefly in our meeting, is wetland delineation, application fee and escrow. I'm pretty sure we don't need that because the wetlands are defined on the survey, and they haven't changed.
Technically, we need to look at that, and so to make that determination, we need to look at a site plan, so we need a submittal. So in situations like this, depending on how close it is to the wetland, we may have our specialist go look at it, and he makes a determination on whether a form of delineation needs to be reviewed or not. So we can't tell you yes or no at today. And
One of the existing buildings is closer to the wetland, and where we're gonna put this. Is that pretty much obligated to be for that?
we just can't make that determination, so we shared what the cost could be. We can't make that determination until, I'm not certified making that. So it might include, a half-hour site visit to make that determination. So we would do that before we required the delineation, so.
You are welcome to come out anytime.
And I just want to clarify, I was talking about the lot consolidation. You don't need new surveys for the lot consolidation, but you do need a new site plan for your new building. So Otto's going to need to update that survey to show.
Where the barn, the new barn that we put in 2004 is, and where
Correct.
the new building.
And that's that we will look at related to the wetland. We'll use that when we go into the field.
And if there's any minor grading around the building, that should be shown. If you're just putting it on as grade, then just that would be shown in the plan.
There'll be a little bit of grading.
Yeah. And so that's what we need to look at.
There isn't the same size as
Right. So we just can't make that determination until we have a submittal, and then we can send our team out, and then they will make that certification. Can we waive that, or do you have to go through the process? We just can't make that in advance of the process. The technical answer, you have to apply for it. We have kind of an approach in some scenarios where we waive it. So you would be a candidate to potentially be waived. We just need the actual submittal and the grading plan to be able to go out there and make that. So we can't waive something, and we need to be looking at a document. Yeah.
Okay. I think that covers all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
we'll, Kendra, I guess we'll get back to you offline with the, regarding the, what I gotta do to get the reconciliation.
Sure, you can give me a call tomorrow if you'd like. Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Okay, item 10B, organics recycling requirements.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, in front of you, we do have a organics recycling discussion. So this was prompted a bit by some changes that the county made in 2022 that required organics recycling. So cities were required to either, if they were under 10,000 in population,